I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing our next speaker, who is Dr. Leonard Sweet. Leonard Sweet is a scholar of U.S. American culture, a semiotician who sees things the rest of us do not see and dreams possibilities that are beyond most of our imagining, and a preacher and best-selling author who communicates the gospel with the signature bridging of the world's faith, academy, and popular culture. Author of more than 200 articles, 1,500 published sermons, and 60 books, Leonard Sweet's recent publications include the groundbreaking textbook on preaching, Giving Blood, A Fresh Paradigm for Preaching, the bestseller From Tablet to Table, The Bad Habits of Jesus, and the fall 2019 release of the 20-year successor to Soul Tsunami, Rings of Fire, Walking in Faith Through a Volcanic Future. Leonard Sweet often appears on the 50 most influential Christians in America listings, and in 2010 was selected by the top non-English Christian website as one of the, quote, top 10 influential world Christians of 2010. His Napkin Scribbles podcasts can be accessed on leonardsweet.com or Spotify. His Twitter and Facebook microblogs are ranked as some of the highest in the religious world. An honors and Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of Richmond, he earned his Master of Divinity degree from Colgate Rochester Divinity School and the PhD from the University of Rochester. Len works with graduate students at 4 institutions, including Drew University, where he has occupied the E. Stanley Jones Chair, George Fox University, Tabor College, and Evangelical Seminary, where he currently holds the Charles Wesley Senior Professorship of Doctoral Studies. In 2015, he launched his own homiletics resource, preachingthestory.com. But I have to say, amidst all of the accolades that I just shared with you, I was most inspired to recommend that we invite Leonard Sweet because I was talking to someone whom I respect greatly in social ministry, Christian social ministry, and he said, you know, if you had a conference with Leonard Sweet, I would be there and I would bring people with me. So I thought, wow, that's awesome. So we wanted to invite Dr. Sweet to come and share with us as we think about the future. So Dr. Sweet, I'll turn it over to you.
Good, it's great to be with you all, and what a rich feast we've already had. I identify with Anna a little bit because we're on opposite ends of the North American theme here. I'm in the Pacific Northwest in a little place called Orcas Island, which is as far northwest as you can go and still be in the US. In fact, we should be Canada. Victoria is south of, I have to go south to get to Victoria, BC. And here we have the reaches of the far northeast corner. So it's an honor to be here. And of course, Willie, I taught at Drew, was dean at Drew for 7 years, and so it's good to be here with you as well. And glad you brought in James Diotis Roberts, the prophethood of all believers, which I think is one of the most important phrases that we can understand today and identify with. As I understand, my role here is to talk about the global impact of the coronavirus as a semiotic, if you will. If you invite me, you're going to get that word, for exploring the future of the church. And let me begin by just saying, unlike the pandemic of 1918, which left few dents on the world's economic, social, and cultural systems, almost all the nations of the world have passed laws and implemented procedures that are only comparable to world wars in their impact on entire populations from COVID. Nations are acting in unison, but not in unity. And this is a huge distinction. We're basically doing the same thing, but without collaboration and cooperation with each other. We've seen a resurgence of vaccine nationalism, closed borders. And so the first global threat of the 21st century showcased a global response of what? Every nation for itself. Every nation unready, unprepared, and unwilling to work with other nations and other peoples. So it does not bode well for our climate crisis, what we're going to do about that whole coming asteroid that is heading our way. And I just want to kind of note that This is one of the reasons why the ecumenical movement has not been faring as well, for the same reason. We are not able to inhabit a global world with global minds, global perspectives. If nations have responded like this, how much more so people feel overwhelmed, underwater, unprepared. They don't know how to handle a COVID-19 pandemic and a post-coronavirus world. Accordingly, I think the start to any missional faith amidst a pandemic pandemonium is to embrace two very prickly assumptions, and one is internal and one is external. And so let me just get them out real quick and get on with it. First, the acceptance of this COVIDian missional moment as a divine appointment and anointing. In the words of the Chandler Moore song, Built for This, there is no battle I'm not built for. In the providence of God, we are in this moment by an arranged marriage between the God who made us and the mission field in which we find ourselves. And that is a 21st century world with 22nd century children and grandchildren. Our kids, just inhabit that for a minute, that our kids born after the year 2000, and for females born between 1990 and 2000, actuarially have a greater than 50% chance of living well into the 22nd century world. Of course, this is Lord willing, Jesus tarrying, creek not rising, Moses not prohibiting, as my Appalachian grandma would put it. And then she'd add some other codicils with it. In J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, a poignant conversation takes place between Frodo and Gandalf. I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's just so memorable to the moment we're in. Frodo says, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened." And Gandalf replies, "So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you." And this is the time that is given to us. The post-COVID, post-corona world is our time. It's our time to be church. Now, notice I said post-COVID, I did not say post-pandemic world. Pandemic, pandemonium, I believe is the new norm, as we should have suspected from the viral visitations of the past few decades from SARS, MERS, Ebola, HIV, Zika, H1N1. So there's one certainty in the missional context which the church is called as we move into this wilderness of a future, as Anna has called it. In the future, there will be new plagues and new pandemics. There will be more viruses, more outbreaks. There will be more what I call red skies, white elephants, black swans, and gray rhinos. We may become COVID proof, but we will never be pandemic proof from here on out. And there is no, as we've heard from everyone so far, pre-COVID reset. There is only, at best, risk management from natural extinction risks and existential dangers of our own creation that are catching up to us, like climate change, and that are being induced, if you will, by our own, what I call grainy technologies. GRAIN is my acronym for genetic engineering, robotics, artificial intelligence, infotechnology, and nanotechnology. So disruption is the new status that is never quo. Stability is the new abnormality. Global cataclysm is the ever-present peril. And this is our moment for mission. Now, the only way to prepare for the end of the world as we know it moments is by developing a high, what Michael Beck and I are calling high CQ, contextual quotient. Developing and deepening our contextual intelligence so we can choose the next right thing in a world of volcanic volatility. And this is very dear to both of us and to the whole Fresh Expressions movement. So I want to mention that and feature that as one of our upcoming emphases. COVID has also taught us that the looking glass of one evil can pinpoint and magnify evils that were lurking in the background all along. And that's what Willie has just reminded us of so powerfully. And can we speak to, enter in, read, act in the moment that we are given, this moment, with guts, with gusto, and with grace. Number two, the world has been put under house arrest, and we have retreated to our shells and lived in sheltered cocoons. And when we come out, we will not be the same people that went in. And this is one of the most interesting things for me as a historian and semiotician is, will our kids, which are really the lockdown generations, the defining moment of their lives is this lockdown, will it have a comet's tail of long-term consequences? When we come out of our shells, I think we are already seeing that we are experiencing shell shock. A lockdown mentality is a closed down mind, body, and spirit. The missional focus of the church then is treating people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and churches, communities with collective PTSD. And when there is this collective trauma, especially a lingering trauma, people stop trusting each other. The virus of fear can be worse than the crisis virus itself. And we are a people hiding in dungeons and living in high dudgeon. In other words, easily offended. And when people are racked in fear and facts and data don't matter, we are less willing to take risks or trust professionals. So unable or unwilling to think for themselves, people either put their minds in neutral and let politicians shift the gears, or we treat seers with sneers and dismiss the press as prostitutes and just go off and trust anybody or any celebrity or anybody that we want to, we have to take a cotton to. Inward looking, self-reliant, not outward focused and resilient. Faith becomes more about protection than providence, more about safety than trust, more about barricades than front lines. And when faith becomes transactional, it's the opposite of what makes faith faith. So in this shut-in economy or huddle economy of circling wagons that is going on out there, you would expect what we're seeing, a resurgence of survivalism, apocalypticism, belligerent nationalism, burgeoning tribalisms. We're already witnessing the emergence of a new anti-establishment, anti-elitist movements and parties that are anti-medicine, anti-media, anti-government, anti-church, anti-business, anti-education. And it's not unrealistic, I think, to be more afraid of what's ahead than what's going on in the midst of the pandemic itself. So the worldwide widening of economic inequality is bringing back a new feudal system on a global level of extreme haves and extreme have-nots. And this post-COVID problem of inequality gets even more pressing than before. And I believe it will come to transcend even political divides. The notion that inequality is a necessary evil to a growing economy will no longer be palatable to either the left or the right. And investment strategies that take into account inequality and climate emergency will expand to equality impact investments. The problem is the church itself is a multinational corporation, and it will be forced and it has been overdue to scrutinize itself to see how its own actions, like what it pays its janitors and office staff, including missing health benefits, widen this gap and contribute to the problem. So after the pandemic, what will stick and what will slip back? One thing that will stick, I think, is the psychological scarring. It could last for decades. The legacy of lockdowns, masking, 6 feet distancing, growing up under the COVIDian shadow will generate local, long-term social, emotional, and mental consequences. An arm's length world may be more dangerous to live in than an arms race world. But this is our moment. And this is the challenge of the world that God has given us. Now, what I want to do here is to, as fast as I can, to give you what I think are some of the the way in which, as Anna put it, God is just taking out of the worst and bringing us to a better place and the best. How God can do and does the best in the worst of times. And so I want to highlight, and I don't know how many I can get out of this, the blessings that I see God working and acting on and bringing about out of this COVID curse. So what are the blessings that may be coming out of this COVID curse that we can celebrate and build on? And I've got a bunch. I don't know how many I can get done, but let me just start. Number one, this is the first blessing to come out of the COVID curse. We have finally, and it took a pandemic to kick the church out of this heretical notion, but we finally realized that ecclesia is not an edifice. The building of the church is not building a building. And the confusion of the church with a building has been and always will be fatal to mission. And I think one of the greatest blessings is that the spell of this heresy has finally been broken. Number two, finally, there is a new front door for the church. After some of us have been yelling about this ever since Al Gore invented the internet, or so supposedly. The internet is the new front door for the church. And nobody can disagree with this now. The internet is now a utility. It is not an option. It is a utility. Wherever you go, you expect power, you expect electricity, you expect water, and you now ought to expect the internet. In a WFA world, work from anywhere, we're learning to do CFA, church from anywhere. We're Zoomed. And the church is discovering Zoom is not doomed. Much of the church is proving the old Gutenberg dogs can indeed learn new Zoom tricks. And we've been much too pessimistic and cavalier about this whole subject for too long. Jesus invites us continually into new relationships with reality. And we have now moved from Gutenberg to Zuckerberg. And the old Gutenberg reality has melted from exploding rings of fire, and we walk a new world, a whole new world. And it's time for the church to embrace both digital dignity and digital indigeneity, which ought to be two mantras for the missional church. The tracks and trajectories of colonialism are all over the online church today. Too often the church is merely imposing on digital culture what it used to do in print culture, inserting Gutenberg in a Google world, rather than incarnating church in a digital universe. If the essence of colonialism is the imposition of your home culture on another culture, then the online presence of the church is more colonial than incarnational. And we go on about what this means and how obvious this is when you go into what is the new front door of the church. But just one example, it used to be pastors had studies. And then when we sold out the corporate culture, we had offices. The pastor of the future better transition from an office to a studio, which, by the way, incorporates both a recording art studio, but also the best of the old study tradition. So the fact that we are still thinking office in a TGIF world, Twitter, Google, Instagram, Facebook, is just unbelievable. Third blessing. The original venue for the church was the home, and the centerpiece of ecclesia was the table. The post-COVID church of the future will bring back the table. It won't be the same table of our grandparents and but it will center around the table. By the way, in the temple, they called the altar the table interchangeably. What was the table was the altar. What was the altar was the table. And the new tabling, the only tabling the Gutenberg Church knew of was Robert's Rules of Order tabling, the technique of tabling, but it was the wrong tabling. The tabling of resolutions, not the tabling of relationships around food and conversation and dance. Even the food industry has gone from marketing food as sensual and sexy to multiracial extended families sharing a meal at the table. And part of the meal is a time which in Hispanic cultures is called sobremesa. In other words, the last thing you would do in certain cultures is when you were done eating, get up from the table. No, you owe that host a sobremesa time, sobremesa, over the table, time of talking and conversation, and you can't talk with your mouth eating, so you talk as you're enjoying a long dessert. And even they have sobremesa cigars and sobremesa wine and other things just made for this purpose of continuing the conversation going around the table when you get to know one another. New York Times commentator David Brooks has written about he calls it the technology of the table, and names the dinner table as, quote, the key technology of social intimacy in any community rich in relationship. I'm quoting here. It is the tool we have used to bond, connect, and commit to one another. I've learned to never underestimate the power of a table. It's the stage on which we turn toward one another for love, like flowers seeking the sun. Isn't that beautiful? Like flowers seeking the sun. The table is that space where we reach out to each other for friendship and for healing. And this brings in blessing number 4. Sozo, Jesus. Sozo. Greek for, we always translate it save. But the original translation by William Tyndale in the Greek, it means equally heals as saves. I grew up with a Sunday school song. I've heard the joyful sound, Jesus saves, Jesus saves. I'm starting to re-sing that. I've heard the joyful sound, Jesus heals, Jesus heals. It's time the church sees itself where it initially saw itself, which is, that's part of that recovery of that loss, of our lostness. We need 4 lost stories: lost sheep, lost coin, lost son, and lost church. The church originally saw itself in the health and healing business, the wellness and wholeness business. When we say the church is in the salvation business, even salvation is a healing word. Salve, ointment, healing ointment. Is there anything more essential than health and healing, wholeness and wellness? Is there anything more essential than salvation? And that's exactly how William Tyndale, when he published the first English translation of the New Testament, translated directly from the Greek text in 1526, he didn't use the word salvation. He used the word to translate sozo, health. The words for health, healing, wholeness, holiness are basically the same. Savior is a healing word. Holiness is final integration of mind, body, and spirit, and the opening of connections between the human and the divine. Sozo Jesus means Jesus is the mediator of ultimate human well-being. And Jesus's mission begins not with him preaching or teaching, but with him healing. And the healing is often prefaced by the question, what can I do for you? And Jesus does not use his healing to puff up his messiahship or to recruit disciples, simply to help people acknowledge their faith, celebrate their faith, and meeting and greeting people in the middle of their aches and ailments and anxieties, and showcasing a God who cares about the person and whatever that person cares about. There are 26 unique healings in the gospel record. Jesus healed each one uniquely and differently. There wasn't one kind of hocus pocus healing method. And the identity with the sick and outcasts is partly what propelled the church forward and the growth of early Christianity. As Jesus's disciples attended the sick and the dying during the plagues which ravaged the Roman Empire in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, I do think and that we will come to revisit our reluctance to be on the front lines with doctors and nurses in this pandemic, and to see ourselves as non-essentials, and to allow the healing professions, the healthcare professionals to identify as front lines, first responders, as we submitted to the definitions of the state to serve the sick and the dying. By vacating the public square and dutifully retreating to our corners, the church made ecclesial heroism much less possible, impossible almost, as the kind of medical heroism. And the heroes and martyrs of COVID-19 are the doctors and nurses and essential workers who kept the hospitals running, grocery shelves stocked, mass transit functioning, sanitation crews, truck line operators, the people Pope Francis calls the saints next door, as we allowed the government to say, no, you're non-essentials. You don't put your lives on the line like the doctors and the nurses and the janitors in our hospitals. Audacious, formidable feats of service and selflessness came from these hospital workers, these public transport people, the supermarket people, the stock workers. It didn't come from the church. It didn't come from the church, or not enough came from the church. The fifth blessing, the dawn of the relationship era. For decades, futurists have been predicting the dawn of the relationship era. But in all of these prognostications, relationship is conceived in interpersonal terms. We have now crossed the threshold of what relationship dawn might be. But the relational aspect is not just with people, but also with icons. And this is a huge shift. Narratives and images wrapped up in soundtracks. The major economic and experiential currency of the future is iconomic, I-C-O-N-O-M-I-C. We live not in an economy so much as an iconomy, I-C-O-N-O-M-Y. The church, which has largely been in the proposition business in the late modern era or high modern period, is finding itself inescapably in the relationship business, a world of iconomy. We are realizing that the laws, the propositions, the doctrines are not the ends in themselves, they're means to an end, and the end is a deeper relationship with God, ourselves, each other, and with creation. And I really think this is going to have huge consequences as people are wanting to live together again in community, not the old community, but the nuclear understanding of community and family is gone. You can call these new communities pods, bubbles, nuclear retreats. The fastest growing living arrangements in North America are multi-generational households. Single family households, what we used to call nuclear families, are on the way out. As the pandemic seems to push people apart, the more people yearn and find a way to keep together. And they're looking for these third places to neighbor and to have relationships more than ever before. So home is the new castle, but it's a new kind of home. It's a home where people are living together in relationship. And this is this dawn of this new kind of relationship era. Especially words like relationship that bring together relationship and presence. especially real presence, desperately need to be rethought and redefined. In a world where every parent or grandparent is smitten when a child shows love for them by kissing the screen or hugging the iPad, digital tools can mediate relationships as well. Relationships that can be reciprocal and rewarding as real, as Zoom instructors are now discovering to their surprise and exhaustion, as online classes can be more relationally intense, richer, and rewarding than traditional classroom settings. So this new home with multi-generations, and by the way, we have a multi-generational God who defines the very being of God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God's very being is defined multi-generationally. And when you know the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you wonder that God would want anything to do with their stories. But God self-identifies as multi-generational. But so that we're discovering that new relational component of the home. But we're also discovering that the home can be, through technology, a feeder and a furtherer of relationships themselves. And we got to get rid of this idea that, yes, the more Facebook, the more face-to-face we need, but it's both and. People can create relationships and deep relationships through FaceTime and Facebook, but they're also going to hunger all the more for face-to-face relationships, but it's not either or, it's both and. The sixth blessing, the church is going from being a production to being a producer. And this means less Hollywood and Hillsongs and more holiness and faith formation. It's increasingly less about the show and more about the know and being known. And this means when the pastor is less involved in making the church a success theater where you go to conferences to learn Botox-like gimmicks, to gain the church's lame numbers and Jimmy the appearances, the pastor will have time to really do more of this healthcare healing component role of that Jesus showcased in his 3 years. He had to save the world. How did he do it? He gathered together a team and he taught them 3 things: preaching, teaching, and healing. And everybody goes to seminary, as Anna knows, wanting to be a preacher. You come out realizing, I also got to be a teacher. But I've never had anybody go to seminary saying, I'm here to learn how to be a healer. And I've never had anybody graduate from seminary. Now I can do the healing better than I ever thought I could. And yet, if I had to rate those 3 for the future, healer would be number 1, teacher would be number 2, and preacher would be number 3. Okay. Number 7, and this relates to what we talked about, which is the power of touch, the importance of touch. It's been revealed, never to be repealed. There is such a thing as skin hunger. It is real. It's even more a psychological than a physiological event, but it still is physiological itself. You need human touch. Infants who, when not touched or hugged, can even die. And we have yet to explore how to experience touch during physical distancing and how we can learn to give and receive new touches to satisfy our skin hungers. Maybe we need to we have different love languages. Maybe we need different touch languages, and to rethink the various ways we can touch somebody else, and communicate that kind of need for it in the 4 different kind of, in proxemics, the 4 different kind of spaces in which relationships form: personal, social, public, and intimate. And all 4 spaces in which relationships form need different kinds of touches. So when anything is the rarest, it becomes most prized. And touch may be the most prized human interface of the future, because we live in increasingly a touchless culture. Number 8, and this I see as a huge blessing. Christianity is becoming a good religion again. GOOD is an acronym for Get Out of Doors. And we are seeing that increasingly the ecclesia understands what it means to get out of doors, what it means to be good. And that Christianity is itself an out-of-door spirituality. And so we got a phrase here in the US, build back greater, build back greener. And why have we not been able to understand that what most of what happens in the Gospels takes place out of doors? Even when it talks about, when Jesus spoke in the synagogue, a lot of these synagogues were outdoor synagogues. So very little happens in the Bible indoors. You got a Last Supper. But most of the things happen out of doors. And we are now seeing outdoor activities are in a culture a boon. Gardening has become one of the hottest new trends and the #1 hobby during the pandemic. Gardening got even more higher status of hobbyhood than cooking or reading. The Economist reports in the world in 2021, and I'm quoting here, Britons of every generation prized a private garden above all other features of a home, including secure locks and a good internet connection. That's hard to believe, but more than everybody now is back to the world's oldest profession, gardening. Between 8 and 9 and 10 Britons have a private garden. This viewership of primetime flower shows is skyrocketing. Just try and find some seeds or buy a shed or reserve some camping space here in the US. I mean, there are more boats in the waters off the San Juan Islands where I live than in the last 30 years. Horticultural therapy is becoming huge. And so if you want, part of practicing faith, especially faith in the future, is, again, learning what God created Adam and Eve to do and to be, tend and till the garden. Plant some flat, dull seeds into a dark dirt out of trust that the sun and rain will miraculously change buried seeds into iridescent, colorful, shimmering flowers. That's the healing power of the garden. And this war on nature that humanity has waged must end. It must end. And why has the church not been the one to lead this? Why are we still putting in lawns when we could put in gardens? Why are we not putting in wildlife quarters in cities, connecting churches to other churches, putting in places for insects to grow, and for bird sanctuaries, and just putting in our big lawns, our nice pretty lawns, and putting all the sides on them, the insecticides, the pesticides, the herbicides, which are all suicides. So, number 9, the blessing. The church is entering an age of innovation and imagination. You've already heard all the speakers before talk about a holy imagination, talk about a sacred imagination, talk about a biblical imagination, talk about a sanctified imagination. But the world's oldest, God created us in God's image. We were created in the image of God. And part of that image, being in God's image, means you've got an imagination. And if you don't have an imagination, you are not reflecting the very image of God. And this is how I think crisis can catalyze innovation. It cracks open a universe of possibilities. It makes us relook at life with our mind ajar. That's a poet, Elizabeth Jennings, liked to put it that way. Some things kind of pry open our minds and leave our minds ajar. And I think COVID has pried open some really tough lids and has left our minds ajar. Times like these take away all our excuses for resisting change. They force us to use our right brains to find new ways and forge new pathways for doing life and church again. They push us mentally to read more, to think more, to imagine more, to hope more. About the only thing that can bring down an oligopoly is a swarm, and crises can catalyze swarms of entrepreneurs to crawl over the monsters that are facing us and bring them down to earth. For a long time, the Church in the West, rather than bristling with energy and entrepreneurship, has been stuck in a dead zone of reductive imagination, with the globalization of triviality and superficiality covering the church from one theological pole to the other. And so I think COVID-19 is yanking the church out of its stuckness in the status quo and kickstarting some creativity and imagination for the Jesus mission of high expectations, big thrills, expansive dreams. And the crisis, if we let it be, can be a shock treatment that exposes our bad default settings and opens us up to resets that reboots for new encounters with burning bushes and smoking mountains and eureka light bulbs. That's where the Willie's point about Jubilee is so important. Jesus had a 5-point mission statement in his first sermon. Number five. First one was good news to the poor. If it's not good news to the poor, it's not good news. But number 5, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, which was the shorthand for Jubilee, where everything starts over and we begin again. It was never practiced in Judaism, but it was always kept there as a hope, as a messianic hope. And Jesus is announcing in his first mission statement, where he actually announces that I am now, and this is what got him in such trouble with his hometown people, his family. I am now Jubilee. Jubilee has arrived. We're starting over again. The kingdom of God is here, and the kingdom has a name. King Jesus. Calamities can spur innovation, and creative disruption can stimulate new ways to innovate. And I think this is an apocalyptic moment in the true sense of apocalyptic, not doom and gloom, but boom and bloom and zoom, an unveiling, a revealing of new heavenly realms that may have been hidden before this unveiling, but they are now more apparent. And it's time to rethink the church, time to rethink the world. We're in a whole new place. So we should take off our shoes, roll up our sleeves, and let our imaginations loose. And it is this moment that is such a blessing. Number 10, the 10th blessing to come out of this COVID situation. The masks are unmasking us, and wearing of these masks. I'm now in Chicago, and in the hotel, even they want us wherever we go to wear these masks. The masks are unmasking us, forcing us in a kind of sadomasochism to confront the invisible mask we've been wearing when we go out. And we have always been wearing, especially when we go to church. The masks are not something new for us. Everyone is having trouble getting used to a world of mask spaces and 6-foot spaces. But get real. We are now needing really to rip off our masks and be real with each other and confess the masks that we have been wearing with each other, and to confront what it means to be real me, real you, real church, real followers of Jesus, real Christianity. COVID-19 forced us to live in a world in hiding, a world behind masks, but maskism just revealed our number one problem after the fall, and that is we are hiders. This is our natural state. We are not seekers. That's not our story. That's a different story. That's not the Bible story. The Bible story is God's the seeker. We are the hiders. God's first question after the fall, where are you? Where are you hiding? Why are you hiding from me? And if the worst category, if the worst mistake is a category mistake, which is a catastrophic mistake, then for 30 to 40 years, we've been in a catastrophic mistake by defining our category as humans, as seekers, which makes God the hider, not we the hiders, and God the seeker. We should have been doing hider-sensitive worship, not seeker-sensitive worship. Number 11. And just as, and one of you I think mentioned this in your comments in the chat, but two of the greatest contributions of Christianity to world civilization has been in the health field and the education field. And I think COVID is going to replant our place at the front lines of the health and healing, understanding that the mind and spirit are as important as the body, and that they can't separate mind, body, and spirit in the healing enterprise. But in the world of education, we've been too long we've been stuck. And COVID-19 is pushing dinosaurs out every door in every domain, even the educational arena. When I was at Drew, one of my key faculty that I brought there was Samuel Proctor to lead the African American Studies program, and he over and over again predicted that education needs, these are his words, to be defined as the cultivation of the imagination. And he called me, as at that point Dean of Drew, and called on all of his Proctor fellows that the purpose of education is the cultivation of the imagination. And one of the most important things in preaching is an imagination, a biblical imagination. Both academia and the church have been working off an educational model created by the Prussians during the industrial age. The bankruptcy of this big jug, little mug model of learning can no longer be denied or blocked. We live in a world where no authority figures are needed anymore to access information. But authority figures are desperately needed to process and assess information and turn information into knowledge, wisdom, and truth, which, by the way, Robert Graham engraves on all of their clothing, embroiders in some way those knowledge, wisdom, and truth phrases. Every person now has access to all the learning in the world, basically. But how to assess what is fake and what is real information, and how to process that information into knowledge, wisdom, and truth. We need authority figures more than ever, but not the traditional ones, the hair professor ones. We need mentors. We need coaches. And that's the importance of the coach and the mentor is the reason why who you studied with now is more important than where you studied. People don't talk about, I went to this school. They talk about, I studied with this person, I studied with this person. And even if it's just going to a conference where you sit at the feet of that person, that's the new power of the mentor. Faith means we live life forward, and that was so richly expressed in Anna Robbins' presentation. We learn from the past, but we lean into the future. Jesus pushes us from the past, but more pulls us from the future into the future and beckons us to join him in what he's already doing in that future. Jesus is always ahead of us. This is where Gregory of Nyssa insisted that faith goes from beginning to beginning, for all eternity. Such a fast God, always before us and leaving as we arrive, is how Welsh poet priest R.S. Thomas puts it in one of his poems, Pilgrimage. We romance the dance and glance of God's back, as Moses did on the mountain, as God is always going before us. We're always catching up to God. Number 12, the 12th blessing. The pandemic has destroyed the illusion that we were in control of our lives. Our fixation with strategic planning, a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan. We've never really read the story of the 10 bridesmaids properly. You had 5 who said, well, I can plan when bridegroom's going to come, and 5 who said, no, you got to prepare because you never know when the bridegroom. So we had 5 strategic planners and 5 preparers. And who went to the party? Okay. I think the 2021 lockdown has been history's biggest rehab for control addicts. And boy, did we need it. And COVID-19 has, I think, more than almost anything, showed us that we cannot control the world, we cannot control our lives, and we cannot control the story. If you think you can control the story, you haven't read the story, or you don't understand the story, or your earth is flat. The earth is moving. There is no stable place, no fixed point. The temptation to control, to manage, to organize, to plan, to fix things in place, rather than to prepare for the mobility of the universe. The universe is always in motion. This has been roundly rebuked by COVID. And the church must learn preparedness models of movement rather than planning models of control and security and trying to nail things and fix things in place. The 13th blessing. I think the post-COVID world requires the church and is calling on the church to read the story again from a new vantage point. Before COVID, the world was stuck in a bad equilibrium. For example, working from home was less common than it should have been. Why all the 2 to 3 hour commutes per day when a lot of our work could have been done just as well from home? Quote, the glory days of the Main Street office and downtown skyscraper are over. And as we know, there were never glory days to begin with, but the TV series, The Office, is an elegy to the days of the past. Like what Anna said about some of the 50 shows. Leave It to Beaver is not documentary. I love that. After all, doesn't bringing people together at the office foster more creativity, collaboration, and innovation? Well, or does it promote idle chatter? Does it promote water cooler gossip? Does it promote tension among people? There is no more business as usual as there is no more education as usual. And in theological terms, behold, I do a new thing. Do you not perceive it? So the question is, what kind of new thing is God doing and is God up to? And I think, will it be, as we live in a more and more globalized world, will this new thing be a more cosmopolitan world, or will it be a more cosmopolitan world? I don't think that globalization is over, as The Economist featured Goodbye Globalization on its cover not too long ago. But I do think that the unitary nation state will continue to collapse and crumble, and that we will see new forms of political configuration, such as, and some of these hark back to earlier forms, city-states, stateless nations, fractal governance, corporate states. So the whole new globalized world will be different from the one that we are used to, or we've dreamed up in our minds. In philosophical terms, we're in the midst of what Thomas Kuhn in the structures of the scientific revolution called a paradigm shift. New metaphors you've heard: disruptive technology, black swans, but all these phrases are getting at the same thing. When a new metaphor or mode of thinking or even a thing replaces your old metaphors or thinks or things, hold on to your seat. Everything goes back to zero and the days of best practices are over. And that's why best practices, the danger of best practices, you need to know what they are because they tell you what worked yesterday, but the world's moving. I mean, the half-life of scientific education is 6 years. The half-life of engineering education, 3 years. What's the half-life of computer education? What, 18 months at best? Overnight, maybe? So we are, you tie yourself to best practice work in the past, I guarantee you those will not be the ones that will work in the future. So we need them for inspiration, but not for implementation. And when things go back to zero, everything needs not transformation, but transfiguration. Like a dead tree, once transfigured, takes the shape of chairs and desks and pipes and chess sets. So what emerges from going back to zero is something new, not conventional. And I believe it's time to turn off the computer, reboot the OS, defrag the machine, start it up again. And it's time for a transfigured church. No more remodeling, no more renewing, only renovation and innovation. And let the Spirit build her house. One more thing, and then I'll stop here. So what blessing is this? I forget, but 13, sorry. I think the post-COVID church will witness a rebirth of variety of different churches. I mean, some churches will be bigger than we ever imagined. I'm in Surabaya, Indonesia. A church there, a Pentecostal church, has 150,000 members. I mean, 150,000 members. I repeat, 150,000 members. And we think we're doing such hot stuff here in the States. I mean, come on. But they will also be smaller. And so the churches are going to get smaller and more cellular, a cellular spirituality, a more monastic mode of mentality about church. We're also going to see, even in some areas, a revival of the catacomb church. So, but as Anna has said already, COVID spells the end of the Constantinian captivity of the church. It is now clear the collapse of Christendom is in the West have been seen as two of the best things that happened to Christianity. I think they're two of the worst things that ever happened to Christianity. And so we are back to a place where there are no culture Christians anymore. If you go to church today or part of a living community, whatever it means to be church, whether you're young or old, is because you want to be there, not because you're supposed to be there or it's socially advantageous for you to be there. The days of the disengaged Christian or the anonymous Christian or the culture Christian are over. The days of the church as a preferred backdrop for weddings, funerals, life events, or even worship itself are over. The Christian religion is disappearing from Western societies. And in some areas, if you do say, I am a follower of Jesus, or I am a Christian, you will pay. There will be consequences. And going to church is no longer something that is positive, but in many people's minds is negative. And even in some areas, and this was most surprising to me, like in Ireland, the Christian presence in Ireland is diminishing to, quote, the point of virtual invisibility. And this was just made evident and made claimed in just a month ago that you have no visible presence of the church in Ireland almost anymore. Elites throughout Europe and North America have already made the transition to mockery and contempt for anything Christian. And this does not mean that it is not a culture that is deeply religious. I believe it is. Even atheists now claim to be religious. They have their own religion. It's just a no-God religion, but they still want to be known as having a religious system or a faith system. But so the whole secularization thing is right. We're now living in a world where there are multiple faiths, multiple religions, and Christianity will take its place as just one of the many that are out there. It will not be easy for Christians who see themselves as, quote, chosen people to learn to live with the indifference of the world at best, much less its hatred and mockery at worst. But this is our call, and I love what Anna did. It's not to exile, but it is to wilderness. And we are people now that are in a position where some of our ancestors were in the past, which means it's a time of tremendous hope. The early Christians were known as some of the most high hope people around. The first Christians didn't forget hope. They always hoped, even in the worst of times. They hoped. Yes, they loved. And yes, they had high faith, but they, more than anything else, hoped. Hopelessness is the acid rain of faith, the nuclear winter of the spirit. Time magazine named Steven Spielberg the most influential person of his generation. He received the Kennedy Center honors for a lifetime achievement and was asked by the actor Liam Neeson, the Irish actor who was giving him the award, by the way, what is your favorite ending to a movie? And Spielberg replied, hope. And I leave here with that one word. This is where I end. This is where the Bible ends, with this incredible book of Revelation, with hope.